Hello and welcome to another edition of A Lot of Help with James Lott Jr. here on JLJ Media. I am the JLJ and the Lott, A Lot of Help, James Lott Jr., certified life coach, professional organizer, and all-around media person. And I love bringing people back. Talk about subjects we've talked about before, but we're going to do some updated data and some updated questions for them about teen addiction and what's happening. Because we just we're still in a pandemic of sorts, but we're coming out of a major part of it. But there's some studies and things that have been going on that we're going to talk to this person about. The Addicted Child is the book. HelpTheAddictedChild.com is the website. He has an addiction counselor. He has all kinds of stuff. We'll talk to you can watch the other one, find out what he does. But it's my friend Richard Capriola. How you doing, Richard?
I'm doing great. Just doing great, James. Thank you for the opportunity to come back and visit with you again.
Yes, I agree. I agree. Okay. So the first question I want to ask you before you kind of begin, because we're going to talk about in depth so the ages that we're talking about, we're talking middle school, we're talking high school, and I guess possibly when you say teens, I guess some college, as we're talking about, or is it just high school, middle school?
It's primarily high school and middle school. It's anywhere from, say, 10, 11 years old up to 17, 18, but mostly it's the middle school and the high school years where we're most concerned.
Now, now we're mentioning because we're going to talk about several things because drugs, meaning other heavy drugs, obviously, marijuana, alcohol. But you're mentioning, so I want to get this clear though. So nicotine, are we talking regular cigarettes or talking vaping
That's
device?
an excellent question. For years, kids had been smoking cigarettes, and cigarette smoking among teens, among adolescents, is now at an all-time low.
Oh,
It is lower than it's ever been in the past. And part of that is because they have switched from smoking cigarettes and cigars and things to vaping nicotine. And for 3 years prior to the pandemic, we had been seeing a dramatic increase in the number of kids, high school kids, that were vaping nicotine as well as marijuana. So they've switched from smoking cigarettes to getting their nicotine through vaping.
wow. Okay, that's I didn't know that. Wow. And so, full disclosure, folks, as my people know, I'm transparent. I started smoking cigarettes in high school myself. I have not smoked in 20 years. I gave it up, but I did start in high school too. I started in high school. It was the 80s, and I started in high school, and that's where I picked it up. And then I quit somewhere in the late 90s, early 2000s. So yeah, so it was high school for me myself.
Yeah.
Also, a question I want to ask is some of these studies and the things you guys are figuring out. Does this include states like mine, California, where marijuana is now legal?
Yes, it's a national survey that's done out of the University of Michigan. It's called Monitoring the Future, and it looks at kids that are in eighth grade, 10th grade, and 12th grade across the nation. So we're getting a snapshot of those three grade levels and the drugs that they're using, their attitude about drugs, and how risky they think those drugs are. And we do that every year, and it's been going on for decades. So there's quite a historical amount of information there. And these kids are in all states across the country.
From your studies, but in terms of, because you just said something, I'm very curious to really hear about this. What do the studies say for harm? What kids think if it's harmful or not? What do the
Yeah,
kids think these days?
they don't think it's harmful. When we ask them how harmful is it for a kid to be smoking marijuana on a regular basis, most of these high school kids will tell us they don't think it's very harmful. When we ask them, well, what do you think about the harm of having a drink of alcohol almost every day? Again, they tell us they don't think these drugs are very harmful. The survey also asked them about availability of drugs. In other words, how easy is it for you to get these drugs? And when we ask them, okay, tell us how easy it is for you to get marijuana, about 80% of them tell us it's no big deal. And how easy is it for you to get alcohol? Again, the response is it's no big deal. We can get it if we want it. So, these kids have these drugs readily available. They know how to get them, and they don't think they're very risky. So when you put those two things together, you have a situation where we're seeing the drug use that's out there because kids know these drugs are available. They can get them if they want them, and they don't see them as being very harmful.
I think back to the 80s when I was a teenager. That's when I was a teenager, and it feels almost the same. Back then we thought, oh no, cocaine and stuff is just recreation. It's not. You don't get addicted to it. It's just cocaine.
Yep.
It's like everybody's doing it. Clearly, we find out. Obviously, it's the opposite. But it's like it's funny how people that age group who doesn't really know that much. Not really. They're still developing. They're you know what I mean. Like and their thought is, oh, it's no big. We'll be fine. It's no big deal. I mean, and that's so 40 years later, it's like almost the same.
Yeah, because I don't think that they see, severe consequences as a result of drug use in the adolescent population. Not like you see it in the adult population,
Right.
Where somebody who's addicted to a drug, for example, they unfortunately and sadly have many times faced catastrophic consequences. They might have lost a job. They might have lost a marriage, a family. They might have been incarcerated. So these can be, catastrophic consequences, and kids don't see that. And quite honestly, even the kids that are using a substance don't face those kinds of catastrophic consequences. Their biggest consequence is being grounded by their parents. So they don't have a lot of consequences for their use, and they don't see their drug use as being all that big a deal, sadly.
Do any of I'm sorry. Everybody, it's a big storm coming to LA, so there's stuff flying. My house is shaking, stuff running around. So if I look around, I hear a big noise. I'm like, what was that? I have a lot of plants outside. No, okay. So one of the questions I want to ask is because he sent me data, and I have I could go any direction. So I'm trying to make sure I want to ask certain questions. You're also doing this study. Are any of the questions or data collected talk about their own parents' nicotine, drug, vaping, alcohol use? As like,
No, they don't really get into that because this is a survey that's really focusing on responses from the kids about their use and their attitudes,
okay.
not necessarily on, what their parents might have been doing 10, 15, 20 years
Well, no,
ago.
no.
So,
I mean like current. I meant like currently,
or
like
even current. Yeah, no,
okay.
I have not seen data on
Okay.
are their parents continuing to use while the kids are using too.
Or drink alcohol. I'm just curious because, like, again, I saw behavior that was normalized on some level or not normalized. Some people come from alcoholic households or drug dealers. So
Yeah.
so I'm just curious. That's just something I was curious if that.
Well, I think the alcohol use may be more common than the drug use. I mean, a lot of families engage in drinking alcohol for social reasons during the holidays. Kids might be more likely to see their parents drinking alcohol than smoking, say, marijuana, only because it's much more available and more likely that adults, family members, might be drinking alcohol. So kids might be exposed to that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you on that. Actually, I think that's probably very true. Okay, so I'm telling you how I want to go through this. First of all, I'm gonna look at the eighth graders,
Yeah.
just because that is the youngest. That is a young group,
Hmm.
and when I'm looking at some of these numbers, and I want to actually start with I'll start with vaping. So number one, you're saying you're finding that they're finding a way to get it easier, I guess, out there
Hmm. Hmm.
than before, and it looks like it's going down. The percent of students, I'm looking at it for the last 3 years, slightly down from last year, but like it's gone down from 2 years ago. Um, but it's going up for the 10th and 12th graders. I don't know. So, what do you think about that about the eighth grade and the whole the vaping nicotine stuff?
Well, I think what we're seeing across the board with these drug use is that when the pandemic came along, 2021, we saw a dramatic decrease in the percentage of teenagers that were using substances because many of them were homebound, doing online courses, pulled away from their academic studies, pulled away from their extracurricular activities, pulled away from their peers. So we saw a dramatic decline in adolescent substance abuse during that pandemic year. What happened a year after that data just became available, and what we're seeing is that there has been a rebound, a slight rebound. In other words, the substance abuse rebounded after the pandemic, but remains below the pre-pandemic level. So it hasn't returned to the levels of the pre-pandemic use, but it did increase. It did rebound. Now, it may take years before we see if it actually gets back to the level it was before the pandemic, but it's tending to move in that direction.
And we'll get back to life. I mean, so to speak. I mean, where things are being dropped and lifted, and just everybody's back out there. But I also wonder too, there's more stress too, because I think the pandemic's changed a lot of us, and I feel bad for the kids.
You know, among the adolescent population, we have known for 10 years that there is a severe mental health crisis among the adolescent population. We've known that for 10 years. The pandemic sort of increased that, made it more intense. And I think a lot of kids now are continuing to struggle with, mental health issues, depression, anxiety, stress. Those might have intensified during the pandemic, and now they've carried off into the current year and getting back to school. And many adults also have faced mental health crisis as a result of the pandemic. So I think you're absolutely right. This is an issue that we need to pay attention to because it's been going on in the adolescent population for a long time.
Wow, 10 years. That's I just know it couldn't help any. I mean, I just felt mainly I have grandchildren, and some of them, they missed their friends during that time period, those couple of years. Especially here in LA, we had a whole lockdown. They missed their friends. They didn't have the prom that year, or they could have birthday parties. I mean, like little things we take for granted. I mean, I was upset I could have a birthday party. I mean, I was upset. I'm grown. But for kids, I mean, just that regular rites of passage.
Yeah.
Some games, they were either on Zoom or they were delayed or they were canceled. So I felt bad they get to have the experience that the rest of us got to have.
That's right. That's right. And no doubt that had a significant impact on a lot of these kids.
So out of all of these things, you have the drug use. So I'm looking at the 12th grade. I'm like, well, they're almost adults. And those numbers are high. I mean, excuse my language. But those numbers are really high compared to the 11th grade, the 10th graders and the 8th graders. I almost feel like that's because they're much older. It's probably more people doing it, I guess. I mean, what is the studies telling you guys when you see that?
Well, I think they're just a little bit older. They're maybe they started using or began to get curious about it in the early grades. Obviously, the more kids who use, then kids who aren't using are subject to their peers and to associating with more and more kids. I just think as kids get older, the data shows that the percentages of those kids that are using substances increases.
It does. Well, I look at it, it does. But it makes sense to me also. I mean, it does. I mean, it's kind of it does, but it shows it very much that it has. I mean, like way big. Well, 10th and 12th are close in some of the areas. But I'm looking at some of these numbers, and I'm seeing, if I'm gathering correctly, alcohol still is number one, isn't it?
Alcohol for a long period of time has been the most popular drug or substance that teenagers are attracted to. Alcohol and marijuana have been the two substances that have captured kids' attention the most. Now, vaping is catching up fairly quickly, so I would say that we can put vaping in this, vaping of marijuana and nicotine, as another very popular substance that kids are using. But alcohol, marijuana, there's no question that those are the substances that teenagers are attracted to. There is some use of the more hardcore drugs, but really the percentages are very, very low, usually less than 5%.
When you mentioned illicit drugs, were they defined? Like what they were, what because I noticed you saying in another report, fentanyl, which is a big problem with adults right now, was
Yeah.
not really a big problem with teens. But so, was there any other drugs? What drugs are teens taking?
Well, you can look across the board, and there is some percentage of them using a lot of drugs that are out there on the street. There's some abuse of the ADHD medications, the Ritalin, for
Oh,
example.
okay.
There is very small amount of kids who are using harder core drugs like cocaine, even small percentages of kids that might be using hallucinogens. But again, these percentages, especially in comparison to alcohol and marijuana, are really, really very, very low. Um, the one thing that we did notice as a result of the pandemic was an increase, a significant increase in prescribed medications for ADHD. These are medications that are prescribed and under a doctor's supervision. There was a big increase in the percentage of kids that were using prescribed medications for ADHD. And what we think happened was that during the pandemic, when kids were sheltered at home, parents became more aware of their child's attention deficit disorders and sought out medical attention for those kids, which then resulted in higher prescription levels for those medications.
That makes
The
it.
other thing you mentioned was fentanyl.
Yeah,
Fentanyl is not a drug that's common among the teenage population. Sadly, it's invading the adult population, and too many adults are overdosing and dying on fentanyl. Which means it's becoming more and more dangerous out there. But what is important for parents to know is that they need to educate their children, their teenagers, their kids, that the pills that they may be buying on social media or over the internet or off the street may contain fentanyl. And they may not know that it's in there. So although it's not a drug that teenagers, adolescents go out and seek, the danger is that the drugs they do take, the drugs that they do buy off the street, off the internet, off of social media, could be laced with fentanyl.
that's good to know. Well, that's anybody out there too, especially that could be yes.
That could be adults, the
Yeah,
adults
yeah,
buying, other types of drugs too,
yeah.
because you never know where these drugs are coming from when you buy them through the internet or on social media or off the street. You never know where those drugs have been and what's happened to them, down the road.
Very true. That's very, very true. It's just it's so there's so much about this. The report is just so fascinating to me. Okay, so they're coming back. We're coming back to now. A lot of people are going back to school, actual in person. Some places are hybrids and all different kind of things going on. So when you look at this report and you've talked to the kids, in your opinion, do you think it's going to increase even more as we kind of get into this endemic stage or whatever it is now? What do you think? Do you think it has the possibilities of going even further?
I think there is a real possibility that we may get back to the pre-pandemic levels. These increases that we saw in 2022, a year after the pandemic, indicate that we're moving in that direction. The substance use among teenagers is not to the pre-pandemic level, but it certainly is moving in that direction, especially for alcohol. Alcohol had a statistically significant increase a year
Last
after the
year,
pandemic in
last year.
2022.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
So even though some of these increases may appear to be very small, my concern is, are we going to continue to move in that direction and eventually get back to the pre-pandemic levels of teenagers, adolescents using substances? I think we may be moving in that direction.
This is a national survey, so I just have to ask this: is is all the data just collected as once, or are there certain areas they look at, like certain economic groups, social economic groups? I mean, how's that looked at?
I haven't seen that data recently. I know that in some of the reports in the past few years, they have focused on looking at demographics, ethnic background. So they do look at that as well as, geographically, are these kids in the urban areas, the rural areas, the suburban areas. So that data is collected. I'm not sure it's collected every year, but
Okay.
I have seen in the past where they have focused a little bit of attention on that.
Yeah, and I was wondering because I know I have cousins who are in rural areas and they drink more than anybody else than some of my cousins who live in the city. So I was just kind of, I was curious about it. I feel like I had at least asked that. I was kind of curious because
Well, that's what I say to parents and anyone who wants to learn more about this topic of adolescent substance abuse is that no child is protected. No child is totally protected. It doesn't matter where you live, urban, suburban, rural area. It doesn't matter what your level of income is. It doesn't matter where you send your kids to school. Every child is vulnerable. There are protective environments, but no child is totally protected. Every child is vulnerable to getting captured by these substances.
yeah, I'm glad you said that. That's very true. It really is. So I mean, okay, I just have to ask you because I'm like, eighth grade. I mean, this. I mean, we're talking, 12, 13-year-olds. I mean, that's young.
Yeah.
I mean, what was a parent? I mean, so what are some things you suggest a parent should look out for? Because you are a counselor and stuff. I mean, because I want to hit those kids first because they're going into high school, they're coming out of middle school. Like, what do we look for? What do we do for them?
Well, when when I was working at Menninger Clinic and as an addictions counselor, and I would sit across from families and go through their child's history of using a substance and give them a diagnosis of a substance use disorder. Sometimes these parents would look across at me and they would say, "I had no idea this was going on." Or if they did suspect their child was using a substance, they might say, "I sort of thought something was going on, but I didn't think it was this bad." And these are good parents. These are very
Right,
good
right,
parents doing the best job they can. They missed the warning signs because nobody told them what to look for. And that was the motivation to write my book,
right,
to give parents the information, the knowledge, the warning signs, because like anything else, if you can catch a problem in its early stages, you're more likely to be successful at resolving it before it goes on to be, catastrophic. So my message to parents is learn what the warning signs are. Feel better prepared to deal with this issue if you have to, but learn the warning signs so that you know what to look for.
yeah. The addicted child is looking. That was our last conversation, so you can check out that here at A Lot of Help, and I'll
Yeah.
post a link. I'll post a link to that again because I was saying that's the next thing. It's like, what can we're going to do? Because I'm like, let's look at let's look at the ones that are coming in the eighth grade, and if some of them have already used before, because this study's not really about before, but what if they already used for the seventh grade or sixth grade or fifth grade? I mean,
Yeah.
it's totally possible. So once we get them there, I'm thinking, what can we do to kind of stave it off? And if they're already thinking it's not a big deal, that's already a detriment. That's already an obstacle to get them to
That's a
not do it. Right?
that's a problem. That's a
That's a
problem. If they're
problem.
thinking it's not a big deal, they're thinking it can't happen to my kid, then excuse me, you're setting yourself up. You're setting yourself up to what potentially could be a catastrophic event. And I would also say that this book, although I wrote it primarily for parents,
Yeah.
this is a book that's good for grandparents, for aunts, and for uncles, because sometimes grandparents can catch things that the parents don't see. So if the grandparents know what to look for, if they know what the warning signs are, they may catch these warning signs before the parents do. So this book really is for any family member, anybody interested in knowing what the warning signs are, learning how drugs work in the adolescent brain, know what assessments need to be done, and what your treatment options are.
Good point. Because yes, family members, family friends, godparents, whatever out there who are around the kids. My relationship's different with my grandkids than with their parents. I mean, this is how it is. It's just different.
Sure. Yeah.
You're right. So there may be little signs, and also we're a little older. Sometimes we may catch things faster because you're not in it. Sometimes, parents, we get it. Sometimes you're in it. You're trying to work and you're trying to handle what's happening outside the house and what's in the house and the food. And I had this are you okay? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Let me step away for just 1 second.
Okay. Good. Because my thing is it takes a village to watch everybody.
Yeah.
So that's a good point you make up, and that book is good because we have it. We talked about it's good to help people just get a copy and look at it and see if you catch something. Okay, because I think a lot of people aren't looking at kids. They're looking for older, yes. High school, they're probably thinking, yes. High school, sure. College, yes. But we're talking before high school.
Yeah.
8th grade. We got to look. I mean, it can start, like you said, no matter where it is, it can start young.
Absolutely. It can actually start in pre-teenage years.
Yeah.
We see some of that with inhalant use. But these years, starting from preteen all the way through high school can be very vulnerable time for kids. So parents need to just be aware of what's going on and learn as much as you can. Knowledge is power. The more you know, the better you feel prepared.
Yeah, and I know that most people, almost everyone knows alcohol
Yeah.
outwardly is like can cause problems. Like you say, don't drink and drive. We have all these campaigns or stuff like that. But the drug ones, and I don't mean the illicit drugs. I mean like the marijuana and the vaping nicotine and the nicotine. I mean, we have some commercials on it. I thought we need to do more. I guess I just thought we need to do more to deter the teens from wanting to start that.
I think so, and I think that the way that we can do that is through a neuroscience approach, and by that I mean kids have heard that drugs are bad, drugs are illegal, don't do drugs, don't do this, and it doesn't mean anything to them.
Yeah.
But what I've found helps is that they're very curious. They want to learn. They want to know how things work. So if you can approach it from a neuroscience point of view, and I have a short chapter in my book to help parents understand how the brain works and how drugs work in the brain. But kids are more likely to pay attention if you talk to them about the brain and how it works and what different areas of the brain do, and give them a firm understanding of the importance of protecting that brain, which doesn't get fully developed until around age 24 or 25. And then once they grasp that, once they understand the basics of the importance of the brain, then you can introduce how drugs work in the brain and how drugs can harm the brain. So you take a neuroscience approach, which is more likely to capture their attention and interest rather than say, well, don't do drugs, they're bad for you, they're not good for you, because they're not going to pay attention to that.
So I just chuckle just a little bit because some folks did try back in the day. And again, I had this is your egg on drugs commercial. I will never forget the commercial. It was a huge commercial that made everybody laugh. Like no one, I don't know, any of my friends took it seriously. They thought that's your egg on drugs. It was like kind of, but I really applaud them for what I know what they were trying to do. They were trying to say drugs will fry your brain. I mean, that's the whole point.
Yeah.
But it became this whole kind of funny, egg on, the egg. So I don't know. And I don't, yeah, I think but we're also fighting against companies who are, I'm sorry, selling, I don't get too political on it, but just selling to teens and they're just making it attractive and attractive packaging and how that works. I think it makes it more attractive.
Well, especially in the vaping area where you're
Yeah.
getting different flavors of vaping instruments and substances. And, it's almost, marketing to the kids.
Right.
And so we're fighting against that too.
Yeah, no, yeah. Well, thanks for saying this to me. I was reading. I was like, this is actually fascinating and eye opening. His book's The Addicted Child. So go ahead and actually go get it. I'll put a link in here in the description. Go get it, read it, and see. I mean, you just never know. Someone close to you might be going through it. A kid might be going through it. You really have no idea. And again, we're not placing any major blame on you. We're not saying shame on you like that. Life is busy. There's a lot going on, and or also you just don't know. I mean,
Right.
you may be a person who doesn't do drugs or vape or smoke. I have friends who don't do anything, and the kids do. So it's like, it's not always learned behavior either from parents. So there's no blame on that either. It's just that Richard and his colleagues, University of Michigan, all that, they're just trying to show you and monitor, like I said, the future. And I like that. And it's kind of saying this is what's going on out there. Keep your eyes open, right?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, basically. Richard, thanks for being on the show again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, James. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and contributing to this discussion. So thank you so much.
It was my pleasure. And if you have any more updated stuff, come back on. Like we'll continue, because I mean, this is a continual conversation.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's like it won't end tomorrow. I mean, it's like everybody's free. We got a solution.
Right.
This for a while. So, and as new crops of teenagers are born, I mean, this is a situation. So you're welcome back on the show anytime.
Okay. Thank you so much.
I'm JamesLottJr. This is A Lot of Help. You can follow us on all social media platforms, A Lot of Help, and JamesLottJr. and JLJ Media on YouTube. When I post this, share with anybody you think needs to see this. Please share it, retweet it, share it. Let them know, because a lot of parents out there may have just no idea. Like I said, grandparents and aunts and uncles, godparents, just share it with everybody. They're the future. They're the future. The 8th, 10th, and 12th, they're the future. We want them to be productive, members of society. That's what we want for them, and have good, healthy, nice lives. So tell everybody about this. I will talk to you next time.